out on the porch. All right, so welcome everyone. This is, gosh, this is October 2020 or November 2020. 2020 is almost over. So welcome to the Robert Lenz group of the Sierra Club. My name is Christine von Kalnitz. I'm the chair of the group. Gosh, we have over 1,400 members in the Low Country here, and a lot of people focused on exploring, enjoying, and protecting the environment. Sorry I was a minute or two late. I was I was volunteering for the city of Charleston. They're working on their climate action plan. So I was helping them out with that tonight with a meeting. So here's just a little bit about our group. Some of the things we get involved with: oyster bagging for DNR. We've got meetings, we table, we go out and we try to get involved with everyone. Did I do that? Okay. We do have two positions open. We've got conservation chair and political chair. Of course, you know, most of the political stuff is over now, or almost over now. And our political chair position, you know, won't have much to do for a little while, but we would like to fill that position. Conservation chair works on things like recently the State House passed a bill to protect our turtles and other creatures like that. So that's sort of a conservation issue that someone would work on. They would get the word out and try to get people to call legislators and help out with that. So just wanted to give you sort of a flavor of what a conservation chair would do. All right, outings. I think Star, are you going to take this one? I can possibly unmute you. Laura, can you unmute Star?
I muted myself. I'm sorry. So we don't have any official Sierra Club outings until next year, COVID-related kinds of things. And so we've been trying to come up with some things for you to do kind of on your own. One of the ones would be to go up to the Seawee Shell Mound Interpretive Trail up on Highway 17. If you're interested in looking at stars, for instance, you could go out to the Gadsdenville Public Boat Landing, and there's a link there for that. It's in the newsletter, so you don't have to copy it down right now. The Patriots Point Nature Trail is a very nice walk or bike trail, and it's out at Patriots Point and runs through several miles. It's a wooded area adjacent to the golf course. And if you go down to the full extent, you can go out onto a little boardwalk kind of thing and look out over the harbor, which is nearly always pretty wonderful. That's the Hog Island Trail and Observation Deck. You run to the end of the Patriots Point Trail and then cross a little road and then another 300 yards or so, and you're out on this boardwalk that's shown there. And one day soon, like next year, we'll be doing our own outings again. I guess the word is inshallah or inshallah. Anyway, see you outside soon.
Thank you, Star. That was great. I ride my bike on that Patriots Point Trail all the time. It's a fabulous trail, and I actually go to that observation deck and look over the harbor. It is, again, just fabulous. I encourage anyone to get out there and do that. All right, so decision 2020, the voting is over. The counting of the voting is not. So the federal races, of course, these are people that the Sierra Club national level endorsed. So and the state level. So Biden and Harris were endorsed. Jamie Harrison, Joe Cunningham, and James Clyburn. Of course, there's no decision yet on the Biden and Harris. Jamie Harrison and Joe Cunningham lost their races. James Clyburn did win his race. In the state house, I know that Spencer Wetmore won her race, and I do not know if the other three, I do not think that, I know Ed Sutton lost his race, and I'm not sure about Debbie and Daniel. Does anyone else know about them?
Daniel was defeated.
Daniel was defeated. Okay. And Debbie Bryant, I'm not sure. It's hard to find this information sometimes. All right. So before we start tonight's program, I wanted to tell you about next month's program. So that will be December 3rd, 7 p.m., another Zoom meeting. We'll have Clint Calhoun will join us, and he will be talking about the Party Rock fire. So what happened was in 2016 in North Carolina, there was a wildfire in the western part of the state. And the blaze had started 6 days earlier at Chimney Rock State Park and had grown to over 2,000 acres. And it obviously was threatening communities, of course, animals. Wildfires are, they threaten just about anything in their path. And we've seen that the last couple of years. So Clint Calhoun, he's going to tell us how the fire started.
My video is stopped.
Excuse me? Sorry, I don't, okay. Well, Clint Calhoun is going to tell us how the fire started, its economic impact, the short-term ecological impacts, and the predicted long-term ecological impacts. And I'm really interested in hearing Clint talk to us about this because of just all the fires that we've seen going on, Australia, California, Oregon, Washington. We prescribe burn in the Francis Marion forest, and that does reduce our risk somewhat, but we really need to keep an eye on that forest as well. So I'd like to, get some information on this. I'm sure we'd all like to know more about this for the future of the Lowcountry forest too.
Can I make just one comment?
Yes, Julia.
I know the area, and so I invited Clint to come talk about it because after the fire, the expectation was that we would just see a blackened mountainside, that there had not been any prescribed burns. There was a lot of litter on the ground. Now, 4 years later, it really looks good. And so I think it's interesting that it wasn't what many people anticipated the aftermath would be. You can see some burned tree trunks but the forest floor is clean and the canopy is green. And I'd be really interested to hear what Clint, who has incidentally a really interesting blog too, has got to say about the comeback in this area.
Right. Thank you, Julia. So tonight we are being joined by two great people from Audubon, South Carolina, Jen McCarthy Tyrell, and she is the Bird Friendly Communities Coordinator and Master Bird Bander for Audubon, South Carolina. And she's also Charleston Audubon and Natural History Society Chapter President. She has worked in avian conservation in the Charleston area since 2007 when she started her graduate work in environmental studies at the College of Charleston. And Emily Davis is also here. She is the center manager for the Audubon Center and Sanctuary at Francis Beidler Forest, as well as an artist, data enthusiast, traveler, and passionate birder. She holds an undergraduate degree in creative writing and fine arts from Kent State and has worked with groups such as the Avian Conservation Center, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they're going to be talking tonight about Raptors of South Carolina, and I'm really looking forward to that. I know that I have recently had to shoo some raptors out of my backyard because they were after my birds, which are cockatiels. So this is going to be great. Welcome, Jen and Emily.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I am sorry about the lighting here. I couldn't find a babysitter tonight, so I'm with a friend. She's got the kids, and I'm on our porch. So hopefully this is the quietest spot I could find. So sorry about that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to start out the presentation and then hand it over to Emily. So she and I are going to kind of tag team all the info here. So let me get the screen share going. Just bear with me a moment. Where's the presentation? There we go. Okay. So I realized today I probably should have called this talk the diurnal raptor migration and raptors of South Carolina, because we don't actually touch on owls, but we're going to go over first raptor migration, which Christine is probably what you're experiencing in your backyard. We have a lot of birds moving through the area, specifically raptors, and they may be the ones who are trying to get a hold of your cockatiels. So we'll kind of talk about that and some of their conservation issues that they faced over their migration patterns. But first, so birds of prey is a term that is frequently used when describing raptors, but I think birds of prey is really a broader term than a raptor is. Raptor is very specific about how the birds kill their prey. So this bird that we're looking at here, some of you may or may not know it. This is, nuts, I'm sorry. I hit the wrong key. There we go. This is a shrike, and shrikes are considered birds of prey in a way because they actively kill live prey. And they're a really cool little bird. They're also called the butcher bird. So they'll take things like lizards and gnolls, frogs, grasshoppers, small birds, small mammals, shrews, and they'll take them and impale them on thorns or barbed wire fences. So they're very kind of gruesome little hunters, very cool birds. But they are not technically raptors, because raptors use a different method of capturing or taking their prey out. Sorry, my slides don't want to advance. There we go. So raptors use their talons. So they use their feet to kill their prey. So that's what kind of separates them from the other birds of prey. Specifically, I've seen chickens kill live mice. So birds of prey can really refer to a lot of different bird species, but we're going to be specifically talking about raptors who use their feet to kill. So when we talk about raptor migration and bird migration in general, we're in a great place for it. The Atlantic flyway is what we call it. So if you look here, we're right along this coast here, and the blue line represents raptors. And so a lot of the raptors come from up in Canada in the Northeast, and they travel down the Atlantic flyway here. Some stay the winter, some keep going, some will cross the Caribbean there, some will actually go around the Gulf and down the Central America. So it just kind of depends on what species you're talking about. But some of our winter raptors are arriving to stay, and some of them have already left and gone to South America. But we'll talk a little bit more about those specifically. But when they make this huge epic journey, they go through a lot of perils. But the way that they do this is they like to look for a free ride. Raptors in general need to consume anywhere between like 20 to 40% of their own body weight a day just to maintain their weight. Falcons are up to 40%. So if you think about it, that's a lot of food for them to be looking for. So they need to conserve their energy if what they're focusing on is traveling and getting south for the winter. And so they look for free rides. This picture is showing you two different ways that they utilize the atmospheric conditions to travel easily. The first one on the kind of more center of the slide is called a thermal, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. It's convective, a convective cell where warm air rises, and they use it like an elevator. So they just kind of glide or soar up, 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 up. And once they kind of hit the top of that rising column of air, then they glide down, and then they find the next one and they go up, 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 up. So it's really interesting because they can travel for potentially like hundreds of miles with barely ever having to flap their wings if they've caught a good day with a good tailwind and they're finding lots of thermals. The other way that they travel with ease and catching free rides is convergent lifting. So if you have a mountain range like the Appalachians, you'll have air coming across the flat land, wind coming across, and it hits the mountains and goes straight up. And so they use that again, like a free ride, just like hang gliders or those, the glider airplanes that you see. They do the same thing. They can ride on mountain ridges all day because there's that constant updraft. So that's how they do it and how they conserve energy. And when they're traveling, they run into a lot of issues. So not only when they're traveling, but in their everyday lives. This is a famous bird. Unfortunately, it's dead. But this is a bird named Lima by the residents of New York City. And it's actually the mate of a very famous red-tailed hawk called pale male. There's a pair of red-tailed hawks in New York City that nest in a very public place, and the birders there and, just residents of New York City know these birds well because they're very visible and get to watch them. But unfortunately, this one specifically ate a rat who had been poisoned with rodenticides, rat poison, which is a second generation anticoagulant. And so that unfortunately caused the death of this bird. There's plenty of rats in New York City, and people use rat poison because they feel like they need to. I'm not sure if there's ever a way to rid New York City of rats, let alone anywhere else. But it's something to consider. If you have rodent problems around your home, just think about the possible implications of what's in your area and what it could affect. Because what happens is the rat eats the rat poison, it gets sick, it wanders off, it doesn't feel well, and it's either very vulnerable for it to get picked up by another predator, or it just keels over and dies. And many predators, if they come across something that's somewhat freshly dead, it's like, oh, that was easy, I didn't have to hunt this down. And they'll, take advantage of a dead animal. And unfortunately, more than rats eat rat poison. Other animals like rabbits and squirrels and raccoons, they die. And then other things like hawks, foxes, bobcats, they'll eat it and they'll die. Or a cougar, it's just the list goes on, but it essentially travels up the food chain. And if any of you are familiar with Kio Island and their bobcat population, a good amount of their bobcats have died very recently from ingesting rats or ingesting something that came into contact with rodenticides or the anticoagulants. And so unfortunately, they've lost a fair chunk of their bobcat population to the point that they're trying to work on legislation banning it locally, at least for a time, so that the bobcats can hopefully recover. But it's a very real problem, and it's very local too. So look for alternatives if you can. Another thing that really impacts a lot of raptor species, as well as vultures, is lead poisoning. Lead poisoning typically occurs or does occur when it's ingested, not necessarily when a bird is shot. So this eagle is suffering from lead poisoning, and it's not because it was shot by a lead bullet, it's because it ate something that had lead fragments in it. So sometimes when a deer is shot or another animal, they don't always die. Sometimes they're just grazed and they have these metal or the lead pellets in their skin. Then maybe they get hit by a car or maybe another animal catches them. And when these bullets hit their skin, they bust apart. So the bullet on the left is a lead cord bullet, and you can see how it just went in a bunch of pieces. And so, the birds eat it, they get sick, and they eventually die. You can rescue or treat birds that have lead poisoning, but it depends on how long they've been in that condition, how bad the poisoning is. There's a lot of factors in it. Some birds are able to be brought back, but not all of them. And if you look on the right, the answer is going to be either copper core or non-lead ammunition, because you can see that one slug, when it hits its target, it stays into one piece and it doesn't break into a bunch of shrapnel pieces like the lead bullet does. So if you're a hunter, if you know any hunters, or you know someone who likes to go out and shoot clay pigeons or anything like that, just recommend that they use non-lead ammunition. When you're going on a road trip, this is something that not a lot of people think of. If you're driving in your car, going on the highway, you just ate a banana, no one wants a stinky banana peel in the car, and you think, oh, it's biodegradable, an animal will eat it, no big deal, I'll just toss it out the window because I don't feel like smelling it for the next 2 hours until we stop again. Well, that can cause an issue for a number of different animals, because one, an animal might eat it. So this little squirrel came along, found a nice little banana peel, and is just having a good old time, and something scares him, and he goes into the road, and boom, he gets hit by a car. And then what wants to eat him? Well, pretty much almost anything. If anything found a dead squirrel like that, like a black vulture, turkey vulture, bald eagle, a lot of different raptors will scavenge as well. So it attracts animals to the side of the road where they're vulnerable to getting hit. Another thing that can happen is it creates a really nice edge hunting habitat. So if this squirrel was across the street, minding his own business, eating a banana peel, and then this red-tailed hawk flies down over the road to go get it, then he gets hit by a car. So long story short, try not to throw your food on the side of the highway. Wait till you get to a rest stop. Composting is great, but that's usually contained in your yard and away from a roadside. Just consider where you're throwing organic material like that. And so now we're going to get into hawk identification and raptor identification. We're going to start with the accipiters, which is a fancy word for the forest dwelling hawks. And in South Carolina, we have two of those. We have the sharp-shinned hawk and the Cooper's hawk. And I'll tell you a quick little story about this sharp-shinned hawk that I'm holding here. He was a juvenile in this picture, and he came down and we caught him on Sullivan's Island in the fall. And then he spent the winter. We caught him in the spring, and then he went back up north where he went to another bird banding station and then got caught again. So I think he may have figured out what mist nets were and how he could use them to his advantage to help find some birds. Or, mist nets and hawks hang out in very birdy areas. But either way, he had a really cool story because he was recaptured at another banding station. So that's pretty fun. But when you're looking at these birds, on the left, we have a sharp-shinned hawk. On the right, we have a Cooper's hawk. They look really, really similar, and it's very difficult to tell them apart. But they're the two that we have here. So one thing to note is that sharp-shinned hawks are typically smaller, though there is a little bit of overlap. If you have a very large female sharp-shinned hawk and a very small male Cooper's hawk, they'll be about the same size. But there are some other ways to tell them apart. So the sharp-shinned hawk, if you look at his head, you can't really see this feature, but their dark head kind of extends down their neck, whereas on the Cooper's hawk, it's more of like a cap, and it kind of stops back here. The other thing to notice, if you're looking at the sharp-shinned hawk, you can see that little shepherd's hook from our bird feeding store. You can kind of tell about how big he is. And if you look at the Cooper's hawk, it's eating an adult or maybe a juvenile cardinal, it looks like, either a juvenile or a female cardinal. And so that gives you an idea of how much bigger that bird is. Gives you a sense of scale. Their tails are a little bit different. We'll see this better in the next picture, but sharp-shinned hawks have a sharp cornered tail. That's how I remember it. It's kind of a squared off tail. And then Cooper's hawks have more of a curved tail. So almost like a C. These little fun tricks. I'm going to see if I can get my computer to play their calls here real quick. So this is the sharp-shinned hawk. Oh, sorry. I don't think you're going to be able to hear it. I've got my headphones in, so that's okay. Very different calls. So if they do vocalize, that's one good way to tell them apart. So on the left here, we have a sharp-shinned hawk, and on the right, we have a Cooper's hawk. Sharp-shinned hawks typically have their wrists bent and they're pulled forward a little bit. So their wrists are almost even with their face. And that's what that bend in the wing is. It's actually their wrist. And they also, you can see that squared off tail really easily in this picture as well. Another thing to note, when sharp-shinned hawks are flying, they flap so fast, you can't count their wing beats. But on a Cooper's hawk, if you're watching it and you can count how many times it beats its wing in a little, stint, then that's likely a Cooper's hawk. So you can see the flying T over on the left of the sharp-shinned hawk versus a flying cross with the Cooper's hawk. They have a much bigger head. It sticks out past their wrists. So those are the primary differences. They're really tough to tell apart, but these are bird-eating birds. They like to eat songbirds. They like to hang out around bird feeders. So if you have maybe your cockatiels, Christine, it could be these guys who are interested in trying to get them. So sorry about that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Emily for the next section on Buteos, our broad-winged soaring hawks.
Thanks, Jen. And just an FYI, we have an educational bird. It's a blue jay, and in the evening, he does fly around. So if you see me getting him off the computer, or if he's near, if you see something fly by me, that's what is going on here in my house this evening. Just part of the COVID-19 world that we live in. So Buteos are one of my favorite when we talk about raptors to talk about. So in South Carolina, we have red-tailed hawks, red-shouldered hawks, and broad-winged hawks. So in this picture, this bird here, I want you to pay attention to its tail. If anybody out there, throw it in the chat if you can identify or think that you know what kind of hawk this is. One of the things to look for on this bird is the nice dark belly band that you see. It's almost like a belt And that is one of the giveaways of what species of bird this is. But our budios are sort of the beginning, the starting point when you're trying to identify raptors. I always like to, if I can nail down my budios, especially this species, I can start eliminating. Yep, you got it. So this is a red-tailed hawk. So the red tail doesn't come in until the second fall. So this is a juvenile bird, and you can see obviously it does not have that red tail, but they have these hawks. Budios have shorter, thicker toes for catching mammals, broad soaring wings. And Jen, if you want to go to the next slide, we can see the adult. That beautiful red tail of the red-tailed hawk. And so red-tailed hawks, you know, are one of those birds that are very present. They're forest edge loving birds. They are they're when you ask somebody who may not be a birder to list off 5 birds that they know, typically a red-tailed hawk will be one of them. So they're very well known, and so knowing this bird and its field marks can help you as you're trying to identify other raptors. Next slide. So we know about the red tail, which always isn't there, right? So one of the things we look for, like I said before, is that nice belly band. They also have a dark patagium, which is what we call a dash, which is in the bullets there. You'll see comma, dash, dash, comma. But it's, so we're looking for that comma there that Jen's showing with the mouse, of that dark, the dark field marks there, the patagium, the dark patagium, and then that dark belly band. Their red-tailed hawks are cornerstone, keystone species for other raptors. They're widespread, they're common, they're adaptable, they're very present and visible. And the juvenile birds in the image that we saw before, one of the things that I've learned with my experience of being with these birds one-on-one in different settings, sometimes medical avian rehabilitation settings, is that the juvenile red-tailed hawks have a completely different personality than the adult birds do. They're kind of goofy. They get into trouble often. And then all of a sudden, you know, it's like the light bulb goes off and they chill out is kind of the best way to put it, and become the red-tailed hawk that we know. And so, but I just recently was talking to a woman who had a young red-tailed hawk that literally flew into her fence, going after something. It was hungry. It wasn't successful, but it was acting very bizarre, which they do when they're young and they're trying to learn how to hunt. So, but interesting bird, one of my favorites. If you can nail down this bird, you can start really working your way into recognizing what you're seeing. And especially this time of year when we have raptors that are migrating through South Carolina. Next slide. So the red-shouldered hawk, as you can see in the picture here, very red shoulders, black and white barred tail. If you really take a look at the tail on this bird, I know that it's called a red-shouldered hawk, and we can really see that here, but the tail is what's important, especially in flight, because there's another budio that we're going to compare this tail to. So black and white barred tail that are even, and then it has those red shoulders like I said before. And then if you're looking up at this bird and it's flying above you, red-shouldered hawks have these like windows. We call them windows, and it's almost like you can see through the wings, almost to where if you see the feathers and how they kind of look like fingers, right before that, there's like a crescent window when you look up at this bird that you can almost see through the wings. And in this bird even has a reddish chest, not just shoulders, which you can see in this slide. You can also in this slide see something that Jen always points out, and I always forget to mention it, but you can see the brow on this bird that acts as like a baseball cap. So, you know, they are very good hunters. They often are hunting from very high elevations. And so their vision is key, and having that brow is helping keeping the sun out of their eyes so that they can focus on their prey. But this bird, red-shouldered hawk, smaller than a red-tailed, and it goes for smaller prey. And this is the bird, this is the type of hawk that you're hearing a lot of times in neighborhoods, or if you're out walking a trail at one of your favorite local parks. They're extremely loud, very dramatic sounding call, very, 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 very loud. They definitely make you, they definitely make sure you know that they're there. Next slide. So this is the broad-winged hawk, and when we were talking before about looking at the tail feathers of the red-shouldered hawk, broad-winged hawk is a bit different. So if you're looking at the tail and the image on the left, it has a subterminal band. The last white band is wider than the others, which is not like the uniform of the red-shouldered hawk. This bird also has a dark outline on the wings. It's almost like taking a Sharpie marker, right? And going across if you were to trace it. And these birds are very small. They're stocky. They're about the size of a crow, believe it or not. They're one of the few North American raptors that flocks during migration in very, very large numbers. And between red-shouldered, which is the red-shouldered hawk, which is extremely loud, right? It lets you know it's there. And then you have the red-tailed hawk, which is present and you can identify it. The broad-winged hawk is much more secretive. They typically stay far away from humans. And when they do roost with other broad-winged hawks, and when they do that, they stay far away from where people are. Next slide. So then we're going to move on to the northern harrier. The northern harrier, I could talk about, but I'll try to get through it pretty quickly. When you're looking at this bird, you see slim body, long wings, long tail, long slender legs. This bird is very much, my experience with this bird one-on-one is that it's a lot like a Cooper's hawk. Cooper's hawks, they are very high energy, but they also have these very long extending legs, like Go-Go Gadget legs, like that cartoon that I grew up with. So they literally can forage on the wing. They'll cruise across marshes, find their prey, mainly small to medium mammals, sized mammals and birds, but their legs are so long they can just go down and grab. This bird is also called the Great Fooler because it looks like a lot of different things, right? A lot of different things are combined in this bird. All the ages and sexes have a distinctive white rump patch. That's what you want to look for this bird. And what's nice is that this bird is typically flying pretty low. So you do see that white rump. I would say 80% of the time, if it's not up, flying, soaring in a dihedral. These birds also fly in a dihedral flight pattern when they do occasionally soar. And they have their wings tilted up in a V shape, but often flying slowly, low over the ground, heavy wing flaps, sharp turns, tilting glides. But their face appears owlish. They have a facial rough disc, similar in structure and function to most owls. They rely heavily on auditory cues as well as visual. The females, one of the kind of cool fun facts about this bird, the females, they love rainstorms. And so these birds, they spend a lot of time on the ground. They nest on the ground up north. And in the winter months, they roost on the ground with other northern harriers, but they every once in a while will get a good rainstorm, and typically the females will get up on a post, face the way the rain is coming, and that's how they bathe. And they love it. They just love to open up their wings and face the rain, which I've always thought that to be so fascinating. Next slide. So this is the adult male, which we would call the gray ghost. And we do not commonly see the male northern harrier in South Carolina. You'll see the white underwings here. And with the males, the reason that we don't see a lot of males in South Carolina is because when the Northern Harriers are coming through, we're seeing the females and we're seeing the young. So, and we often, every once in a while, we do see a male. So 3/4 of the birds that we're seeing are either juvenile or female. So it's just that kind of ratio of why we don't see as many males as females. And Jen, I'll hand it off to you for falcons.
Okay, I almost forgot to unmute myself. All right, thank you, Emily. And I was going to say that very first bird on the first slide was a male northern harrier. So I caught that bird on Sullivan's Island, and it was very exciting because, like Emily said, you just don't get to see them that often. So very cool. So the falcon group of birds, they are well known for being some of the fastest birds in the world, specifically this peregrine falcon. And I'd like you to take note of what he's doing, what he's looking at, and what position he's in, because we're going to talk a little bit about their hunting styles in just a second here. But we have 3 falcons that occur in South Carolina mostly, the peregrine falcon, the merlin, and the American kestrel. And we're going to start with the smallest of that group, the American kestrel. We see them more in the wintertime than any time else. They don't typically nest on the coast. They nest a little bit further inland, even though we have a year-round range for them if you look at the range map. But the males are different colored from the females. We call that sexually dimorphic. And the males are just typically prettier, as much, you see that in a lot of different bird species. And they have a distinct mustache. So if you think you're looking at a falcon, look for these mustache feathers. That's these dark lines right underneath their eyes. And they function a lot like grease paint that football players or baseball players wear, where they put them across their cheeks. It helps to reduce glare. Like Emily mentioned before, some of the Buteos have those hat brim like eyebrows to help reduce glare from the sun. Well, if you're going really, really fast as a falcon and flying at very high speeds, everyone knows if you wear a baseball cap or something going really quickly in a boat or in a car, it's going to fly off. It's not very aerodynamic. So falcons, to be aerodynamic, they have this other cool little feature, a built-in grease paint on their cheeks kind of feature. So this next picture is a picture of the male from above. Obviously, you can see the colors are very brilliant. He has a nice slate blue-gray. There's these very distinct kind of dots on the wings that you can see when they're flying overhead. And they have a red tail, very similar to a red-tailed hawk, but these guys are much, much smaller. They're probably around the size of a cardinal, maybe even smaller. So not very big. And the females are definitely more mottled looking. They've got more brown on them. And 2 things to note about this picture that makes them a little bit different than some of the other raptors is that they're cavity nesters and that they are secondary cavity nesters. So that means they have to find a cavity that's already in existence that maybe a woodpecker made, or maybe it was a natural hollow in a tree from a dead branch or something like that. So they rely on these cavities to exist. So their population went down a good bit for a number of different reasons, but one of those reasons was the same one as bluebirds. When people decided that dead trees and snags were ugly and they didn't want them around anymore, or maybe they attracted termites or something, they got rid of a lot of the natural nesting cavities for all the cavity nesters like bluebirds and American kestrels and some of the other species. Another thing to note is that this is a smaller bird, and so they prey on smaller items. This female is bringing a caterpillar to its chick. And so these guys, because they are predators and they eat a lot of these insects, they can be prone to having population decline from related insecticides and things like that. They'll also go for things like small frogs, little lizards, grasshoppers, small mammals, anything like that. And one thing I forgot to mention in the talk I did the other day here, but falcons and a lot of birds can actually see in UV light. And so you may know that urine glows under UV light. And so what these guys do is they'll sit on like a telephone wire and look for areas where they've seen a lot of UV trails of rodent urine, because they kind of dribble as they run along. So they find these high traffic areas of urine that reflects the UV light, and then they'll hang out there and wait for something to run by. A good way to spot them is in the wintertime, if you're driving around the countryside and you see birds on a wire, if there's a group of them, and then one by itself kind of bobbing its tail every once in a while, that's your American kestrel. So it's just about kestrel season. I've seen a few so far this year. So keep an eye out for them. So the next falcon we have is a medium-sized falcon. It's a little bit bigger than the American kestrel, and it's called the merlin. You can tell its size by, this is a Carolina wren, our state bird. So if you know how big those are, you can see how big this bird is. This one is a female, And it's really confusing. I think it's one of the harder birds to really nail down identification for because its mustache feather is really faint. It's not real obvious. And it has that kind of brown mottled color that a lot of the juvenile raptors do. And so nothing really stands out strongly on this bird. So I find it a little bit difficult to identify this one in the field. The males do have a slate blue back. So kind of like similar to the kestrel before, but probably a little bit more dull. And then the females have a brown back. So one of the trickier birds. And then we have the peregrine falcon. They are kind of all over the world. I believe the part of their Latin name translates to world traveler. They're just all over the place. And their mustache feathers are extremely defined, almost like mutton chops or something. They're very obvious. And a lot of us know that falcons are some of the fastest birds in the world. I believe the top speed that a peregrine falcon was clocked at was 265 miles per hour or something around there. Now, not all falcons will actually go that fast all the time. That was a little bit of an artificial situation. It was a trained falconry bird that they took way up in a hot air balloon and then did a skydiving kind of thing with it and clocked it that way. But the reason why they fly that fast is because they actually hunt some of the fastest flyers on Earth. So falcons can fall really fast, but not as really fly really fast. So if you put a pigeon and a falcon in a race, a pigeon's actually going to win, which is not, a lot of people underestimate pigeons and think they're just, rats of the sky, but they are very, very fast flyers. And so for a peregrine falcon to be able to catch one of them, which is one of their favorite foods, what they do is they go way, way up in the sky, look for the birds flying below them. They put the sun to their back, and so it's hard to see them. And they go and they stoop. So they go really, really fast. They dive down, and they'll ball up their feet, and they'll actually punch the bird out of the air. And once they punch it out of the air, they have a cool little notch in their beak, which I think you can kind of see on, let me see if I can go backwards one slide without ruining the whole slideshow. There we go. You can almost see it in this picture. There's a tooth-like projection, a tooth-like shape in their bill, and it's built so they can just go right around the back of the spinal cord in one quick bite, and dinner's out and ready to eat. And so it's a very fast, quick kill usually with the falcons. And because they are typically bird eaters, a lot of bird eaters have very long, skinny toes. It's good for kind of wrapping around their prey items. Their talons aren't quite as beefy as like the red-tailed hawk, which eat things like squirrels with really thick hides, and you really need to grab onto and pierce to kill. Now, you might notice this bird is flying up to a cliff face. We don't usually have peregrine falcons here during the breeding season because they love to nest on cliffs. And we know in South Carolina, there are not too many of those. We have a few up in the upstate. I think Table Rock has a nesting pair, and then Joe Cassidy Gorge may have had one at one point in time. Either way, they don't really breed here, but we get them here a lot in the wintertime. A great place to see them is in the winter downtown Charleston. They're going after all those pigeons. So it's a great place to see peregrine falcons. All right, let's see what's next here. Okay, now I'm going to hand it off to Emily to talk about kites.
All right, thanks, Jen.
Sure.
So kites, these are something very special that we get in South Carolina, and I'm not from South Carolina. When I moved here several years ago, I was so excited that I was going to be living in a state where I could see kites. So in this picture here, we're looking at a swallow-tailed kite. So we get swallow-tailed kites in South Carolina and Mississippi kites in South Carolina. They're called kites because of that, of their flight style. Hopefully, I'm hoping a lot of you have seen them hopefully have seen a swallow-tailed kite before. They're able to hang in the air without flapping their wings. They also hunt and eat on the wing. They're mostly insectivores. And they have very small bodies. This sounds weird, but they have small bodies and proportionately very large wings, enabling them to gracefully stay aloft without expending much energy. And often to begin flight, they will dive from like where they're perched or roosting at, but they'll dive and extend their wings, and they'll be able to project upwards and into these thermals. And often they're at higher elevations than other raptors. Sexes are also indistinguishable by plumage or size. and often communal night roosts near nest sites, especially. Great horned owls are a big predator to swallow-tailed kites and Mississippi kites, but especially to swallow-tailed kites. They rely on a matrix of habitats, bottomland hardwood forests for nesting, and then they also depend on grasslands for foraging. They're unique, unmistakable birds with that forked tail. Swallowtail kites are one of the first to arrive. They start coming into Florida in about February, and they're one of the first to leave South Carolina. So they get in here, they do it, and they get out. And they were once seen along the Mississippi River as far north as Minnesota. The swallow-tailed kites range is now just about a third of its historic size. And in the last 40 years, we've lost about 80% of our swallow-tailed kites. A lot of that, is due to sea level rise, salinity issues, killing off a lot of their nesting habitat. But they're mostly found in Florida and other states here in the deep South, but Florida has the highest population for swallowtail kites. But as you can see in this picture, it's flying, it's capturing, what is that, like a June bug or dragonfly or cicadas. They'll grab it and they'll eat it while they're flying. They'll bring their feet to their mouth and eat while they're flying. And they do eat a mixture of different types of prey, but I would say that insects are the prime. And so they have to eat a lot, right? Because insects will only go so far. They also are known to take entire nests of songbirds when they're cruising along a tree line, and if they have chicks, swallowtail kites are known to just find a nest of songbirds, pick it up and take it to their nest for their chicks to eat. This is the kind of bird that, if you know what eBird is through Cornell, this is the kind of bird that you would want to, report to eBird. Make sure that that your report is noticed, because eBird shares that data with people that are doing research in order to get a better understanding of this bird's population and the decline that's happening. Next slide. So the Mississippi kites are probably one of my favorites. I've had more experience with Mississippi kites than I have with swallow-tailed kites. And so I've gotten to know them, their behavior and personality. They're really amazing birds. So they have triangular tails, not the forked tail like the swallow-tailed kite. They're much more common. You see them in your neighborhoods. They're about the size of a crow. They come a lot later than swallow-tailed kites do to South Carolina, and they leave a lot later. And they usually nest near water in the Southeast. Their shape and color are different, quite different, right, from the swallow-tailed kite images that we were seeing before. Their flight is very deep, it's fluid, easy wing beats. They soar frequently while their wings are flat and bowed, like in this picture. And often they're mistaken for peregrine falcons. Mississippi kites, though, have narrow, their wings and tails are much more narrow and slimmer. And they're young. This is a nice little fun fact about Mississippi kites. They're young from the previous year will migrate and return to the nest site where it was born to help their parents feed and raise the young of the current year, which is, I think, a beautiful thing. They're, I hate using the word sweet, but they're very much a very sweet bird, and unfortunately they do often, with other raptors, they can fall victim to human imprinting, which when a nestling falls out of the tree, kites are not the type of raptor that will care for their young if it's on the ground. It's just the way that it is with them. So a lot of times people will find maybe a nestling after a storm, feed it, think would be a great pet. It's totally illegal, but people do it, and these birds unfortunately sometimes become imprinted. Next slide. osprey. So these are our Seahawks. I'm sure, you know, another very vocal bird, right? And a bird that we see all over, a fish eater. All four talons of this bird are long and curved. Most raptors have 3 toes in the front and 1 in the back, but the osprey can rotate the outer toe backward and forward to help grab and carry fish, which then it rotates the head first, like in this picture, for better aerodynamics. And they also have barbed pads on the soles of their feet that keep the fish from slipping away. And they have a dark eye line, white patagium and belly, as you can see on this in this picture. Often their bent wings when flying is like an M shape when this bird is flying towards you, and when it's flying away from you, it's a lot like a W shape. They're large. They're almost eagle size. They're a bit smaller, but they're large. Lots of heavy flapping for this bird. They do a lot of kiting over water. They love live fish is what they go for. In an environment where I was dealing with osprey and in a medical setting, it was so difficult to get them to eat dead fish. They would not do it. So we had to bite the bullet and we had to pay for live fish. They are going after live fish, so they're not scavengers. But if you look, so maybe not in this picture, but their long wings are crooked like a gall's. But the osprey has a tail that is much longer than its head. But gulls have an equally sized head and tail. So that's how you tell the difference between the two. And then often this bird is known to drift during migration. And I've looked at different maps with geolocators and watched these birds go up and down the East Coast. Really interesting. But yeah, so they nest on their platform nesters. They're a lot of times these birds, what's so interesting about them, they're very sensitive, they're very specific and intentional. So every stick that they put in their nest is very intentional. I know that in the past there's been issues with them, you know, nesting on power line poles or light fixtures, and you know, and these electrical companies didn't want them doing that, so they would put cones up, and then the birds would come back and start stacking sticks on top of the orange cones. They're very site specific, and really interesting, prehistoric. They just remind me of dinosaurs so much. They're super interesting. I think there's a lot we don't know about these birds that, you know, as you know, time goes on and our technology gets better, we'll find out more and more amazing things about osprey. But another really interesting thing about them is that they kind of ignore humans. You know, they're very sensitive birds, but at the same time, they're always in areas where there's a lot of people. Next slide, Jen. I think it's actually going to you to bald eagles.
All right. Thank you, Emily. So I'm going to give you a quick talk. I know we're running to the top of the hour here, so I'll try and be a little quick. But we have some bald eagles right here, and similar to a lot of other raptor species, these ones are not sexually dimorphic. Typically, the females will be a little bit bigger than the males, but that's a really hard thing to tell unless you're sitting right next to each other. And of course, the sizes do overlap some. But very big, very powerful birds. And one thing I want you to notice about this picture is where the feathers end on this bird's leg. Bald eagles are part of the fish eagle family, and so their feathers don't go all the way down to their feet because, you know, you don't want to have heavy wet feathers weighing you down because they do a lot of fishing, but they also do a lot of scavenging, and they also have another fun behavior I'll talk about in just a minute. But one thing I wanted to mention is the full white head and the white tail are very telling of a bald eagle, very easy to see, but it takes a full 5 years to actually get the white head and the white tail on an adult bird. So this is a juvenile bald eagle. And, you know, when you look at it, it might not be the first thing that pops in your head because it looks almost like it's dirty or it's very mottled looking. There's a lot of white kind of speckling along the wings here and on the chest. In the first years, their bills are really dark. They're almost a gray color. Typically, most birds get yellow and orange and red colors from their food that they eat. So it's kind of like a built up coloration in a way. So the older they get, the more yellow their bills get. But you can see this is just not your typical eagle. But one thing I will say is when you're looking at them, they have very long, broad, flat wings. It's almost like a plank of wood flying in the sky. So if you're looking at a really big bird off in the distance, vultures have a very different shape to them. Osprey have a very different shape, even though they're about similar size. But that big, long plank is what you're looking for if there's not a bright white head and a white tail that you can see. So here's a size comparison and also a really fun behavior that bald eagles do. Well, not fun for the osprey. This is called kleptoparasitism. So that's a really fun word you can pull out at your next cocktail party in 2022 or whenever that's going to happen again. But that means they like to steal food from other animals. Sometimes bald eagles will just set up and watch an osprey work all day to catch fish, and then they'll just go out and bully him until they, drop the fish and they can take it off to their nest. So they're very opportunistic. They're very smart. But they do kind of take the easy way out sometimes and use their size to their advantage. I've even heard, I think Mike Walker, who is at Huntington Beach State Park, he's a ranger there. He was telling me that their pair of bald eagles will actually watch their great blue herons fish in the marsh and will go harass them until they, give up whatever fish they had just caught. So they're not just picking on osprey, it's other birds too. So golden eagles are the other eagle that we occasionally, very rarely have in South Carolina, but I think they're around more than we think. They will hang out kind of in the coastal kind of areas. And I believe it was DNR or someone else was doing a survey using trap cameras at bait stations with like a dead pig or a dead deer and a trap camera to see if they could record golden eagles in South Carolina. Now, if you're looking at a juvenile bald eagle and a golden eagle, they can be really tricky to tell apart. But if you get a great view like this, you can see that gorgeous golden mane on the back of his head or her head. And then the other difference is going to be where the white is on their wings. So this is a juvenile bald eagle over here. You can see lots of white mottling, and it's kind of concentrated in the armpit type area and across its chest. Whereas the golden eagle has kind of two spots. They're very concentrated patches of white and not spread out all over like the juvenile bald eagle is. So if you think you're seeing one, you might be. It's very unlikely, but try and get a picture because most birders who've seen either of them should be able to kind of narrow it down if you're able to see the white patches on the wings. Now, the next group of birds I am going to talk about, I could talk about literally for an hour. I have a whole nother presentation on this group of birds, but I will spare you that. I'll just kind of keep it quick. This is a turkey buzzard, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, except it's not a buzzard. That is a term a lot of people like to use for this group of birds, buzzards. They like to call vultures buzzards, and that's inaccurate. It actually came from a term way back when European settlers came to North America. They were used to seeing something called a common buzzard, which is a lot like Europe's version of a red-tailed hawk. And so they saw that bird around. They didn't really see these vultures around. So when they came to America, they're like, oh, look at that big brown bird. It must be a buzzard. He's got a red face like a turkey buzzard. You can see where they get it. But this bird is a turkey vulture. So next time you see them hanging around, don't call them buzzards. You know better now. It is a turkey vulture. And this is a common buzzard. So you can see it's very similar to the other buteos we have. It even has that dark outline, a lot like the broadwing hawk. And smaller than the red-tailed hawk. But either way, you're not going to see one of these around here. And if you do, it's going to be a really big deal. But turkey vultures are very different from the buzzards. And you can tell a turkey vulture from some of the other birds of prey by the coloration under their wings. So you can see there's like a silvery tone that goes from the feathers here all the way to its body. And they also have what Emily mentioned before, a dihedral flight pattern. So their wings are going to be tilted up a little bit and they kind of rock back and forth like, oh, I'm not too sure about this. And they kind of wobble as they go. And so usually if I can just see the faintest outline of a turkey vulture, a mile and a half away, I can tell it's a turkey vulture and not something else. Pretty distinct. So then we have the other type of vulture, the black vulture. Now they have a dark head, but that's not always the best way to tell them apart because turkey vultures in their first year will also have a dark head. It takes them about a year to get that bright red head that you saw. So black vultures have a very kind of fan-shaped tail. It's very squared off, whereas the turkey vulture, it's a little bit more rounded. And then on the underwing side, which you can't see right now, but there's white at the ends of the wings, so almost like it's wearing white Mickey Mouse gloves, and then it's black everywhere else. And their flight pattern differs too. It's more of a flap, 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 flap glide, kind of like they're panicking, I'm going to fall out of the sky. No, I'm good. Panic, 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 I'm good. So you can tell, again, from very far away, if you're looking at a vulture, an eagle, black vulture, turkey vulture, hawk, once you kind of get the hang of what each one's distinct behaviors are, you don't really need a whole lot of other field markings aside from their general shape and their flight pattern to tell them apart. Now, I believe this is the last slide. Yes, that is the last slide. So we did not cover the nocturnal raptors of South Carolina. That would include most of the owls. But we are good to open it up for questions if anyone has any.
Wow, thank you, Emily and Jen. So now I think I'm a black vulture on Zoom. I feel like I'm flapping, and then I'm good.
Panic. Oh, I'm good. Yeah.
Exactly. So let me get into this chat and see what we got here. So let's see. Fewer insects lead to fewer swallowtail kites. Question mark.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
We need the
Right.
bugs.
Yeah.
We need the bugs. Let's see.
Here, I'll stop the screen share too so we can see everyone's faces. There we go.
All right. Oh, I guess there was the picture of, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the name of it. The fastest bird in the world.
Peregrine falcon.
Peregrine falcon. Someone wanted to know where the picture was taken.
Oh, that's a good question. So Audubon is super lucky because we have what's called a digital assay management system. Long story short, anyone who submits a photo for our photo contest, they give us the rights to use it in educational programs like this. And so we have thousands and thousands of photos to use for presentations like this. So I'm pretty sure that was taken for a Christmas bird count or a Great Backyard Bird Count session, and I'm not sure where. I could find out for you though, if you'd like.
All right. So do raptors ever eat seeds or berries?
No, I can't think of any.
The only one I know of is crested caracaras will eat palm nuts. And so caracaras, they occur also in South America. There's a few different species of caracaras, and they're really interesting. They eat penguins too. So they're a raptor that eats palm nuts to penguins, a lot of different things. So obviously ours are not eating penguins, but that's the only one I can think of that is eating seeds or nuts on purpose.
And someone mentioned Caesar's Head State Park as a great place to see migrating raptors.
Yes, that's one of the best places in the state, I think, to go see migrating raptors. And we got a grant and we're going to put up a MODIS tower. It's a wildlife tracking system right up there at Caesar's Head, so that if any of those raptors migrating by that are being counted by the Hawkwatch going on, if any of them are wearing something called a nano tag, it'll ping our tower and we'll find out where they went and where they're going and their story.
My yard happened to be a good place one day. I looked up in the sky and there were dozens of raptors up there, yes. All heading in the same direction.
Yeah, they do that this time of year, and sometimes they pay a visit when you bait them in with live animals.
Well, I wasn't doing that, thank goodness. So after fires, are there fewer bluebirds, wood ducks, and kestrels?
Oh, that's a great question. So, birds actually can recover from fire depending on the severity of the fire. So we do a lot of fire management here in South Carolina, and they're prescribed burns that don't get real hot and will leave a lot of the habitat intact and actually improve it greatly with the right species diversity, opening up the understories. So it depends on where you are. I think the fires out west, they get so big and so hot, they probably destroy a good bit of habitat. But, when you're talking about succession and forest succession, big disturbances will lead to more biodiversity because you get the pioneer species in, and then as it goes through succession, the earlier stages generally attract a lot of different animals and, the new plant communities sprouting up again. So right away, it's not great, but I think give it a little bit of time, and it's, not always the worst thing for some of those habitats.
Okay. And there's a question about the red-tailed hawk. So do they use their tail as a visual display between each bird or other birds?
That's a really good question. Because we know that, Harris hawks do that. I think, I think that's absolutely possible that they're using their tail in some sort of way to communicate or courting each other. What are your thoughts, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I think plumage condition and color is a great indicator of health for a potential mate. And so I don't know if there's ever been a study about mate selection and tail coloration. So very good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And the red-tailed hawks across the country, I mean, there's so many different hybrid, there's different subspecies that different colorations. So when you go out west, the red-tailed hawks get much darker. And so so that coloration does change throughout North America.
Interesting. Didn't know that. So, can a fence be made more visible to birds?
So I think you might be referring to Emily's story about how that red-tailed hawk ran into the fence. I think that was probably not so much a visual thing. I think that was inexperience. It was trying to go after whatever it was chasing and miscalculated.
Yeah, that fence was a rock. It was a rock built like brick fence. So I think the bird just I think he just didn't. He probably was seeing something and flew for it, and just that's all. He was so focused on the prey, he hit the wall, the fence wall. Yeah.
Call of the Coopers versus Call of the Red-shouldered?
So a Cooper's hawk, please forgive my horrible imitations I'm about to do, but a Cooper's hawk is kind of like a kind of thing. And then what was the other? Red shoulder? Red shoulders
Yes.
are I love that species dearly, but they are very noisy. They're the chatty Cathys of hawks. And so if you're hearing a hawk screaming outside, it's probably a red-shouldered hawk, but they go like over and over and over again.
Okay. I think we must have had a chatty Cathy in our neighborhood for a while.
Probably.
All right. Do males migrate at different times? I think you might have answered that.
Yeah, that's species dependent. Sometimes, depending on which one you're talking about. And some raptors don't migrate at all, and they stay in the same area year round. So. Oh, I see. What hawk does the blue jay imitation? Or what hawk is the blue jay imitating? Is it the red shoulder? And I think I saw John Jay flying behind you a second ago, but he does a pretty good red-shouldered hawk.
He does. Yeah, he does a good job. Yeah.
The blue jay is doing just a red-shouldered hawk?
Oh, he does everything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he mimics the microwave and Jen's little girls. He spends time with Jen as well, and so he mimics the girls. He's mastered, though. He really is truly mastered the trill and the call of the Carolina wren. He's very, very good at that. But
so
yeah,
this is your blue jay we're talking about.
Yeah, but yeah, he's my colleague. He belongs at Byler Forest. Yeah, we're coworkers, but he's
okay.
Yeah.
It took me a minute to realize we were talking about a specific blue jay.
Yep. Yeah.
But because blue jays in my backyard definitely imitate hawks.
Yes. And sometimes they'll do that as a warning. If they see a predator around, they will warn using the call of the predator that is around sometimes. So, yeah, they'll also do, I've heard a blue jay do an osprey. I've heard a blue jay do a red-tailed hawk and an eagle. So they're really good at mimicking. If around people long enough, they'll learn words and phrases.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So there's another question about black vultures when they're in large numbers. So are they social?
Yes. Vultures are very social. They often will find prey together, and the social behavior of them. I mean, trying to find a good way to describe it. The more social a bird is, usually the more intelligent they are. And so vultures are very, very smart. And so are Harris hawks, who are social. Corvids, like the blue jays and the crows and stuff, they're very social and they're very, very smart. And black vultures, oftentimes when you see them flying together, it's because they're using that same free ride. They'll find a thermal and all use it together. And if they see another bird in a thermal that's doing well, they'll go over and ride it too. And then they also roost in big numbers together. So they eat together, they sleep together, they fly together. Very social.
Okay. And let's see, do raptors mate for life or just for the season? or for that brood?
You want to take that,
On the
Emily?
species. Yeah, it all depends, on this, but eagles, and if one dies, the other will try to find another mate. Um, I always like, and I know we didn't talk about owls tonight, but I always like the idea of owls. People say they mate for life. Um, and really it kind of just happens by accident because they don't really migrate. So it's every year it's like, oh, hey, there you are. Hey, how you doing? Like, fancy seeing you here again. So it's not really like they've had this bond. They're just sort of in the same territory, which can happen with other species, but it depends on species. And I know that, like, for eagles, at least one of the challenges with eagles is that as Charleston and all, the next in area, as development continues, and these eagles that may not be as habituated to people, if they lose their mate, eagles naturally are not as tolerant of human disturbance or activity. So it might be harder for a bird like an eagle, that maybe is in a neighborhood, has a nest in a neighborhood. If she or he loses their mate, finding another mate might be more difficult because of the environment that's around that nesting site, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And we know about a couple of eagles in Mount Pleasant who've had their nesting area disturbed. So I guess that leads me to a question of, the laws. So, I thought eagles were protected, and I didn't think that a developer could get that close. I mean, they didn't tear down the eagle's tree, but they got really close. So is Audubon working on that, the laws surrounding that, or what can we do?
Do you want to take this one, Emily, or should I? We know exactly what nest you're talking about, and we have talked to a lot of folks who are concerned about that nest. And I'll start with just some basics of, bald eagles are no longer on the endangered species list, so that their protection, in a sense, is a little bit different. But they're also permanently protected by the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. Mm-hmm. And it talks about not disturbing them and, giving them their space and their habitat and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of it also refers to, having their feathers or harming them in any way. But for the nest in Mount Pleasant, Emily, I think you're more up to date on the permits for that. Mm-hmm. I know the developers had a permit approved to do the work that they did. And they waited till the eagles were no longer actively caring for young. And they kind of preserve like the bare minimum of amount of woods in their tree. But
yeah, and that nest has been there a long time. Those birds they're not going anywhere. They're actually kind of building up a wall. If you notice, every year the off of Founders Way, if you're looking at that nest, the one side of the nest gets higher and higher and higher, because they don't, from people taking pictures and looking at them. And it's interesting. Their nests are actually like a platform. They're not cupped. They're real flat. So there are permits that developers can get, and those permits require that the developer hire a environmental consultant, and that environmental consultant has to be monitoring that nest to make sure that the birds are okay, that they're not being disturbed. So a lot of what we saw this last year with the Founders Way nest was that I think people were concerned. The adults were dropping food into the nest, and the young bird was begging for food, which is, eagles are very they I don't want to call them lazy birds, but it takes a lot to get them to fledge and leave and start hunting on their own. They will stay in a nest as long as there's food that's coming. And when the adult birds were dropping food in that particular nest, a lot of that was because that fledged bird that kept going back to the nest for food was being so aggressive that the adult birds were not getting close to it, because the adult birds could have been injured by this young bird and its aggression for food. So
terrible table manners.
yeah, and I've even seen eagles, second year eagles returning to their original nest site pretending to be a chick, going back into the nest or near it and begging like a chick, and they're 2 years old, just to try to get free food. So, you know, they're they're interesting birds, and they are adaptable. It's just, I think that I think the Founder's Way nest is, I think that they're doing very well. I think more of what I get concerned about are the areas like the Nexton area that's being developed very quickly, and a lot of those nests are newer nests. So, but the Founder's Way nest, I do believe is in pretty, it is in good hands, and there's a lot of people that care about those birds and are watching those birds, which is all positive.
Okay, so thank you for that. I'm so glad you know about that one in particular. Have there been any studies concerning feeding within the thermals?
That's, I guess it depends on what is within the thermals. I know kites, they will forage aerially, and sometimes some of their larger prey items are higher up. And so it's not impossible to think that kites are probably foraging in the thermals if it's convenient. If something flies by, they're going to grab it. But I don't think many other raptors are feeding within thermals unless there's a smaller passerine and a falcon sees it and takes advantage of it. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. Do you think of anything else, Emily?
When I think of thermals, I think that's their time to rest, and not be active. It's, that they're allowing the air to push them up. So it's kind of their time to recharge and then kind of boomerang out. So yeah, I agree with you, Jen. Unless that one, something in there that that they might, like a falcon might see or something. But for the most part, those thermals are used just to travel.
Okay. Yeah, I know that, I guess one of the best places to see eagles in the low country is at the landfill.
Yes.
Definitely. That's the best place, especially in the wintertime. It is loaded with eagles.
I've seen them going after, I guess, the seagulls, because the seagulls will pick up something off the landfill and the eagle will go after the seagull to get, like you said, to steal the food.
It's exactly it. They're
letting the little guys do the work.
Yep. They love the gulls.
Yep.
And I think that the landfills, especially when eagles are here, and they may be immature eagles, they're not quite breeding yet. I always think of the landfills as almost like going to the bar or the pub, where they are a bit more social at landfills because there's plenty of food. It's not really a territory for the most part. So so I think it's a place where eagles can be social because they are social birds. But when they're nesting, that's when they can get very territorial, and they do not want other eagles in their territory. They don't want to see other eagles. But the landfills I always think of them as like an eagle pub.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. They were definitely dancing with those seagulls. All right. So I do not see any more questions in the chat. Do y'all have any closing thoughts?
I mean, if anyone's interested in learning more or helping us out on maybe our midwinter bald eagle survey, we have volunteers that run those and also go to the landfills and count eagles and things like that. So there's opportunities to do some of that research. Shoot us an email, drop us a message, find us on Facebook or Instagram. We're out here. We'd love to help you with any of your Raptor ID questions or photos or anything like that. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you both. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Great job. Fabulous photos. Great information.
Thank you.
Lots of thank yous coming in on the chat too.
Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, everyone. So I guess we'll see you back here in December, and we'll find out about fire and forest secession.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.